Welcome to this evening's constructive rest session. Some of you will know exactly what you're doing, and you'll already be lying on the floor on your back with your knees bent and your feet on the ground, with a little bit of something supporting your head, soft back books or some small blocks, something like that. The purpose of the support under your head is so that you don't feel like your head is tipping backwards. You don't want so much that you feel that your head is tipping forwards either. Your intention is to keep that head in balance. It's for your comfort, essentially, and to allow you a bit of space behind the neck so that you can, between the support and your shoulders, so that there's a bit of space so that the neck can release into length and width. So I always like to have a bit of a theme on my constructive rest sessions, and they're usually linked into the classes that I teach online and in person in the week. And this is no exception. We've been experimenting in our classes with the less traditional directions, because this is all based on the Alexander technique, and we've been experimenting with the less traditional directions of thinking inwards and connecting up. And I thought we would go back to basics this evening and think about the very traditional Alexander technique directions. And I'm going to sort of mix them up a bit. And what directions are, it's a way of thinking for anyone that's new to this. It's a very particular way of thinking about bringing your mind and your body into one organized place. It's about an awareness and an intention. And so if you're all now happily lying on the floor in semi-supine position, and I'm going to just clarify that again, you're lying on your back with your knees bent and your feet on the ground. And those feet don't want to be so close to you that the backs of your knees feel squashed, but they also don't want to be so far away that it feels like they're sliding along. If you don't have particularly soft carpet, you might want a blanket under you. If you've got a good underlay, then you'll probably be all right with a yoga mat. You're in charge of you, and you're in charge of your body. And nothing I say is going to be any more wise than what your body can tell you. So do listen. And if you feel uncomfortable, move if that is what you need to do. And stay warm, especially if you're, relatively local, for example, in England, because it's a bit bloody cold at the moment. So we're going to think about ourselves. We're going to think within our body. And the first thing you're going to do is just have an awareness of yourself lying on a mat or on the floor in this position. You're going to have an awareness of that contact between you and the ground, the contact of the back of your head and your chosen support, the contact of the shoulder girdle, those shoulder blades and the upper arms and the floor. In fact, you might be aware of more of just that part of your back, perhaps all the way down through to your pelvis. The pelvis is heavy, so I imagine you're very aware of some part of the back of it, whether it's those big wings, those big ilia, or perhaps the sacrum bone. Some part of the back of your pelvis resting on the ground. And resting is absolutely what we're doing here. So you're not sneakily tightening and holding yourself away from the ground. Equally, you're not pushing yourself into it. If there's a part of your back, your shoulders, your lower back that isn't in contact with the ground, don't try and push it into that space. You're resting. So there's a quality of doing nothing in this work. A quality of leaving things alone. Leaving alone your left foot, just allowing it to be there and resting on the floor, and leaving alone your right foot, letting that to have an awareness, a contact of the floor, no more. Not pressing, not pushing. Part of our approach is for expansion. We want to allow the body to rest in its full length, its natural length, and its full width and depth. Your muscular tension, perhaps if you've had a stressful day, or if, like me, you just feel the cold, you will want to sort of draw inwards. There'll be a closing inwards. And this work is a really good antidote to that, to allowing yourself to find your way back to your full and natural height and width and depth. And we do that with the intention of release. And so the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to be aware of your neck, the front of it, from under your chin down through your collarbones, and ask for that area to soften, a release, a letting go. And as the front of the neck lets go, you might be aware of there's a subtle balance of the head resting on top of the spine, of a sort of a nod that happens at the very top of the spine. You could imagine that you were nodding yes. You don't want to be doing that. You don't want to end up, like a nodding dog. You want to imagine that you're nodding yes. You want to allow enough freedom at the top of your spine for this option of movement, an opportunity of movement that isn't taken. Ask the front of your neck to soften again from under the chin all the way down through to your collarbones. And at the same time, think of the back of the neck. Imagine that lengthening, relaxing into length. I'd then like you to think about your shoulder girdle again. Those resting upper bones, the backs of your arms, the shoulder blades. Knowing where they are. There they are, resting on your mat, on your floor. And in fact, if you can, think about a sort of ease around the shoulder blades, a doing nothing, a non-grip around those shoulder blades. It's almost as if they will fall away from the ribs that they're very close to, the upper back rib cage. And we're looking for space, not just space between the shoulder blades, but the space between the shoulder blades and the rib cage. A sort of freedom so that those upper ribs, your upper back ribs, can expand and release as you're breathing. Often this area gets very locked, very tight, and we don't notice it. It's that area where we like to carry the burdens of the world. What have you been carrying? Can you allow that to let go and say, oh, actually, I could have a bit of freedom between my left armpit and my right armpit all the way across. As if, in fact, you were asking for a widening in the upper back. Leaving the tops of your arms alone, not tightening or gripping them, but letting them rest on the floor. But what lies beneath the tops of your arms, your upper back, your mid-back, asking for sort of a gentle widening in that area. Being aware of the connection of the top of your right arm and the top of your left arm, that connection that goes all the way across your widening back. But also about the space between them, allowing yourself to fully embody the space between the tops of your arms. Take your awareness down to your pelvis. I mentioned before, it's heavy, it's got weight to it. But sometimes if we're gripping around the tops of the thighs, right up by the hips, the pelvis isn't resting fully into the ground. There's a sort of holding, a pulling up off the floor. So why don't you just check just for this moment, around the tops of your left thigh and then your right thigh, to make sure that you aren't gripping, not holding in the groin, but perhaps you are, and no amount of thought is really going to let that go right now. Keep asking. It's simply a wish. I would like the tops of my thighs to release. That's the thought. If, like me, you're a bit of a fidget, then you might enjoy letting the knees rock a tiny bit to the left and the right, almost an imperceptible movement, shifting the weight of the thigh bones in the hip sockets. And then asking again for that ease around the tops of the thighs. Somewhere deep inside your left hip socket is where you want the head of your left thigh bone to drop. Somewhere deep inside your right hip socket, you want the head of the right thigh bone to rest. And if you can get your head around the whole idea of this thinking to create release, you could ask the heads of your thigh bones to direct away from each other, as if you were widening deep within your pelvis. The widening thoughts that we direct within the body create a tone, especially when they're near a diaphragm. And we think of our diaphragm, our breathing diaphragm, that sort of bisects us as the only one. But of course, that isn't. Your pelvic floor is a diaphragm. And as you're asking for a widening through the pelvis, just a thought, just a wish, a want, you're creating some tone in that pelvic floor. And you don't want to be doing anything. You don't want to be gripping or holding, because for a diaphragm to find its tone, it wants more space to expand into. Say hello to your feet again. Notice how they are in contact with the ground. Sometimes when we release a little bit in the pelvis, in the lower back or the tops of the thighs, we need to adjust something around the feet. It might be that your legs aren't as easy in this position now that you've released something in your pelvis, and the toes want to be somewhere different, or the width of your feet, or the length of your feet. Listen to your body. And if it needs to move, make a movement. Relocate a foot. Move those little knees again, left and right, freeing up your ankles while you do. And then be aware of the soles of your feet that are feeling the support from the ground coming up into them. And from the soles of your feet, I'd like you to think up through the bones, through the shin bones, as if you were directing up through your shin bones and out through your kneecaps, asking for the muscles through the legs to lengthen. Directing the kneecaps up towards the ceiling is one of the classic Alexander directions. And what it really means here is that we want the kneecaps not to be heavy and not to be pulled towards the leg bones, but to remind ourselves that the kneecaps are resting on a bit of padding. And that we're not doing anything with them. We're not pulling the kneecaps with our muscular tension. We're asking for freedom. Take your mind around your kneecap. Choose one and mentally walk around it, checking that it's not got some tension somewhere hanging on. And then go over to the other side and check around that kneecap. Even the back of the kneecap wants to have a sense of freedom. Kneecaps releasing up towards the ceiling. A springiness through the knees. And then remind yourself of the back of that heavy pelvis as it rests back on the floor. Remind yourself of the undoing at the tops of your thighs, up near your hips. And ask again for the widening somewhere deep within your pelvis. Widening through the pelvis, widens the lower back. Can you ask for something to release in the small of your back? If it's tight, anywhere in your lower back, all the way up through to your rib cage, you might want to consider softening in the belly, as if you're imagining that your tummy is totally empty and everything's sort of falling backwards towards the floor, soft, empty belly, and ask for a wide back. They go hand in hand very nicely. You can even ask for a bit of widening across the diaphragm, the breathing diaphragm, as I like to think of it, widening through the middle of your back. Now let's think again about the top of your body, where we started, that head resting on your blocks, your books. Does it still feel comfortable? Is there enough ease in your neck? Or does something need to change up there? Is the height of your books, your blocks, is that still okay? Or do you need to slide in another one or remove one? As long as it feels easy in your neck and that your face is roughly looking right up at the ceiling, then you've probably got your book height right. But it does change from day to day, depending on how stressed we are, depending on how tight the back of the neck has got. How's your back of neck in this moment? Can you ask that to soften into length again? Can you be aware of a connection between that contact on the back of your head and then down your spine to between your shoulder blades? Feeling the back of your head in contact with the support and becoming aware of the length from there down and in towards the spine between your shoulder blades. Pretending that in fact your neck doesn't stop at your shoulders but goes deep and into your body. But it isn't really pretending, is it? Because we know that the spine does exactly that. If your eyes are closed, then I'd like you to open your eyes a moment. And if your eyes are open, close them briefly and then reopen them. Without moving your head, gently look around, probably just around your ceiling. You don't want to strain your eyes, you don't need to look all over the place, but you want them to be free enough in their sockets to move. We're just talking about muscles here, aren't we, and releasing them. And these muscles, these eyes are very close to the top of your spine. And if you allow a fixing, starey sort of thing going on with the eyes, you'll end up by locking the top of your spine, and we want the top of the spine area to be free. We want there to be a potential for movement around the top of your spine. If you gently glance towards the left, then just let your head look a little bit left. Turn it a sort of millimeter or two. And then just gently let the eyes take you back to center. Looking up at the ceiling again, resting the eyes back in your skull. And then glance over towards the right and then let the head follow. Keeping lively in the eyes. Keeping awake and conscious, because this work is just that. This is a conscious practice. It's not the relaxation where you get to go to sleep. Although sometimes sleep does just come and take us. So you've been lying there for 20 minutes. 20 minutes is a really good time to do some constructive rest. It's long enough for the body to settle into this position, and it's short enough for you to keep your attention and your awareness on yourself. As you get more skilled, you have more availability for lying there longer on your own without drifting off quite so often. The body gets a bit more used to it and it doesn't sort of stiffen up. It stays lively and free. How's your body feeling? Is there bits of it feeling stiff? How's your lower back and your sacrum, the back of the pelvis? Sometimes it's useful to think of that back of pelvis as something that's breathing, sort of a flexible, moving energy, so that it doesn't end up getting a little bit stiff and heavy or solid. So there's some really classic Alexander directions, and without going into them too much, we're just going to think them all at once and one after each other. A sort of strange phrase that I'm also not going to go into now. I'd like you to go back to your neck, that free neck, and you're going to say to yourself, I would like my neck to release. I would like my neck to release, and I would like to allow the head, the weight of it, to rest on these blocks. You're then going to ask your back to lengthen, and you're not just talking about the small bit of your back that you think of as your back. You're going to think of it going out through your tail and out through the crown of your head. I'm asking my back to lengthen. A sort of freedom in the spine that travels onwards out through the crown and through the tail. Ask your back to widen. Be aware again of that sense of the back of your diaphragm widening, the soft belly, wide back. The freedom in the pelvis so that the diaphragm, the pelvic floor can widen in there as well. Lengthening, widening back. And from your widening back, think of your long thigh bones and your free knees springing up towards the ceiling. Wide back, knees forwards in space. It's not just relaxation. It's an organizing principle for your whole muscular skeletal system. And it does take some practice. But once you've got some basic skills, there's really no end to how wonderful it can feel and it can be in your body. So well done if you've been persisting. Now, if you're wanting to just stay on the floor, that's absolutely fine by me. I'm not going to force you to get up. but it has been now nearly half an hour, and for most people's body, that's enough. So if you are intending to get up in a moment and get on with your evening, just start to rock that pelvis again from side to side. Allow the rib cage a little bit of freedom as the pelvis rocks, so that you're encouraging an ease around the side of your waist, your lower back ribs. You're giving yourself a bit of notice. You're saying, oh, I'm going to roll on my side in a moment, and you might like to have a little stretch. If you do, do it gently, because sometimes after doing this, stretching in a dramatic way can bring on a bit of a spasm. So do be careful, especially if your back is a bit spasmy often. I tend to think of myself as sort of being quite relaxed and lethargic as I roll on my side to then gently push myself up to sitting. I find that's a good approach to take. And if you have managed to haul yourself up off the floor, take a moment to again readjust your awareness of your place in your environment, your sit bones releasing into the ground, and a bit of easy length through the crown of your head. And of course, congratulate yourself for showing up and doing something kind for yourself. Well done, you.